Hello and welcome to the show. Today I'm going to be talking to Anand Francis, who is currently living in Moscow, but he's been working in the Gurdjieff Work for a number of years. So I just wanted to start, Anand, with asking, what is it about the Gurdjieff Work that draws you to it?
That's a pretty big question, really, in itself. I think the first thing that drew me to it was when I was about 15 or 16 and read In Search of the Miraculous. And I had been reading religious material and philosophical material for a few years. And I thought, as soon as I started reading, I thought this was it. And I don't really know why. I still don't know exactly why. But the ideas certainly touched me, and the way they were presented by Ouspensky was, I thought, quite interesting, and things that I'd never thought about, especially this idea of self-remembering, for example, and self-sensing. He didn't really get into. We didn't get into that until later when I joined the foundation at 19. But there were so many ideas that were just, I thought, so potent, so powerful. And I read about To the Table of Hydrogens when I was, I think, 15. And I looked at it and I said, well, this is beyond me. I don't know. I mean, I can see it means something, but I don't really understand. So I put it away for about a year. And next year I read through it, realizing I won't understand it anyway, but I wanted to get through it. And that was my starting point. And the next thing that really affected me was I spent the next couple of years searching for the Gurdjieff work. And I did things like hitchhiking up and down the coast from Los Angeles, San Francisco, and this kind of thing that the young hippies were doing. We were doing quite a bit, and searching for anyone who might know about Gurdjieff. And finally, I saw an advertisement in the LA Free Press that said, Gurdjieff and Ouspensky, 20th Century Mysticism, Franz Hall, UCLA, 8 p.m., I think it was Thursday night. And I'll never forget, I looked at that and I thought, oh, this could be another one of these phonies, because I had met at least a dozen people who were supposedly involved with Gurdjieff already that I had just sort of set aside. One guy was Gurdjieff Spinoza, for example, and I talked to him, and he said to me, he was an older guy, and he said to me, I think you know more about Gurdjieff than I do. And I said, that's not a very good sign if I've come to you. And I met many different people. A guy who was a former student of Crowley and these kinds of people who later became well known. Supposedly, he wrote a book called Secret Talks with Mr. G. And so there were many of these people that I saw, and in addition, I saw some interesting people like Krishnamurti and Chogyam Trungpa and later Carlos Castaneda and some of these other people who were really had something that was interesting. But what happened is I went to UCLA and I met the guy who was going to be my group leader, who I didn't know, Jim Flynn, who was him and Norma Flynn were the head of the LA Foundation. And I met Norma Flynn, unknowing she was part of the foundation, at Tai Chi practice at the same time. So it was like a pincer movement. I met both of these people who were becoming my group leader. And they were definitely interesting. I found them very credible. And I think this is part of what is important with magnetic center. I think there are 5 different qualities of magnetic center that are important, not just the first quality of being attracted to some higher influence, whether B or C influence. the other qualities that are, I think, just as important is what Gurdjieff calls a critical mind. And he says in an aphorism, a critical mind, if you don't have it, your stay here is useless. And what does it mean, a critical mind? Well, it's not a, enlightened idiot mind, if you were. And there are so many on the net today who really are under that sort of aegis of enlightened idiots. And Gurdjieff says not even God can help them. So that we don't want. They may seem brilliant, maybe glib, may have all the answers, but there's something missing in them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's something missing along the line of being.
Yes, I agree with you on that. I've met people like that. They seem to understand the work, but they don't have any being.
And so they don't understand. They have knowledge without being, and that for us is not what we're looking for. So the other qualities I think are very important, and I'll get back to what led me into the work more, is that one has to have a cognitive feeling, an intuition about what is real and what is not real. And this somehow connects with essence. So here you see there is a kind of interesting nexus that is not spoken about in Search of the Miraculous, for example, in other books, between essence and personality and magnetic center. These things cannot be divided, like he says magnetic center is in personality. It is in personality, but it's not made up of only personality. Mm-hmm. So you have to have this intuitive quality in you. And then there's this gut instinct. Now, I learned that because I was on the street part of the time when I was young. We had difficulties. Sometimes we were without a place to live and things like that when I was young. And so you learn how to tell, like a dog or a cat, whether these persons are enemies or friends, or whether they're good or not. And you have to have that gut instinct. Mm-hmm. And the now, of course, yes, and now
senses are honed more.
Science is actually telling us, as Gurdjieff did, that there is a gut brain, that it actually exists. And so many things of what Gurdjieff said now are gradually being proven to be true in a Western scientific mode as well. So then if you have have a critical mind that allows you to sort of look at facts and say, well, does this make sense to you? Can I follow it, in a sense, logically? And if you have this intuition and you have a gut instinct, then together these form a kind of fourth thing, which is common sense. And this is perhaps the thing that's most missing in people today. Mm-hmm. They look at something and they don't apply common sense to it. Does this seem real? Does this seem true?
I was told that common sense isn't very common.
Well, that's true. It isn't. It isn't very common. And common sense somehow now gets back to a kind of, we call it also horse sense in America. Oh. And it gets back to a kind of being, that you're present in relationship to what you're trying to understand. And this presence is, I think, fundamentally important to having common sense. And if you see somebody who is more, let's say, more ordinary, like the true ordinary idiot, not the first one, which is foolishness, but the ordinary idiot that comes after a period of time you're in the work, and you find that you can't keep up the pretense anymore. And in that, you see the pretense of others. Now, somehow these two work together, how you see yourself and how you see others. And then if you can apply that, you have a good chance of finding a real teacher. But just with magnetic center, it's not enough, especially today. It's just not enough. And this goes back to Mr. Gurdjieff's fundamental question about suggestibility. If we are suggestible, if we're easily hypnotized, if we believe things, especially on the internet today, but not just there, everywhere, if we believe things without a critical mind, without intuition and common sense, then we're going to go in the wrong direction. And as my first teacher, Jim Flynn, once said, you know, you have to have something in you that tells you if you go down this street, you'll be okay. But if you go down this street, you might get knocked over the head and robbed. You know, very, very simple, common sense sort of thing. And that's what people have to realize, that if they move onto the road, which is the fourth way, they have to be very careful. You know, who's taking them, who's guiding them. And so I was so fortunate, I think at least, that having gone into the Gurdjieff Foundation in Los Angeles when it was still very viable, the foundation, very strong, I met Lord Pentland, John Pentland, and that convinced me. The In Search of the Miraculous, you know, got me going, got me to the point where I wanted to find somebody. And then meeting Lord Pentland, I said, here's somebody who actually has made the transition from man 1, 2, 3, somehow higher 4 or 5, I didn't know. But when I first saw him, it was in a group of about 8 to 10 people. And he walked into the room, and it was like watching Nijinsky. You know Nijinsky, the great Russian ballet man, where it was an entrancement. It was something so enchanting, so incredible. And I was thinking, this person has higher body. I could more or less see that there was this higher presence in him. And so I said, well, this is what I'm looking for. And then when he spoke, again, it was very amazing. It was like listening to a Plato, you know, Socrates. He would begin speaking in a certain way and you would be following it. You would be following it inside. Yes, yes, okay, I understand. And then suddenly he would turn around in what he's saying. And you would say, how did he get there? But intuitively knew there was a logic to how he got there. You knew it, but your ordinary head couldn't follow it. You know, you had to drop the formatory. You had to drop it completely. Still, many things were incomprehensible, but you knew it was what you were looking for. It was that shining gem, the paradigm, you know, that René Dumas talks about in Mount Analog, you know, where they're looking for some treasure, you know, but it's something that touches an inner part of you. That's the treasure, you know. It's not external, of course. So that's really what convinced me that the Gurdjieff work was for real. I certainly had hoped it was for real, but I needed facts. I needed these facts. Lord Pentland provided that fact. He was definitely an extraordinary human being. And for the next 14 years till he died, I found that he, I think, became even more extraordinary, that he never stopped. You know.
So you could see that he developed continuously.
He
People
did.
like that don't think they've suddenly got it. They know it's still a continuing work.
That's exactly right. And that's what our work is. This is one of the difficulties for people, I think, today, sometimes in the foundation, in places where they have sort of codified the work and systemized it a little bit like Ouspensky talks about. And with Madame, of course, who was extraordinary. I only met her briefly a couple of times, but clearly she was extraordinary. And yet she also represented a specific phase in the work. She represented and this is not in any negative context, she represented the passive phase of the work. There was the ray, an active movement. Before that, the dough. The dough was sort of the whole, right? The oeuvre, right? That Gurdjieff brought in, but not everything was unfolded yet. And so that first unfolding came with the Ray and then Madame with the me, where she was bringing together many things. And in this sense, a little bit like you think of Isis and Osiris, where Isis and her sister Nepheides, they find the pieces of Osiris, which have been scattered 70 different places in Egypt. This is a fantastic parable, really, myth. And Seth has separated them. Right? Seth has killed his brother and separated these pieces. And there's a Seth in us, in me. And I have to recognize this quality, and we might even call it connected with chief feature, for example. So here is this being who's gathering as much as she can the pieces of the Gurdjieff work together and putting them in one more or less one place. And certainly she did that with the Gurdjieff movements and dances. And she did, I think, a fantastic job in many ways, but has to be recognized that she was intentionally, you might say, the passive force, active and passive. And these two have to mix. These two forces have to mix if you're going to get through the mi-fa interval, if you're going to go to the next stage. And I think she did an incredible job living to 101 years old, as Gurdjieff told her she must, you know. And it was fantastic, but that's just a phase of the work. You cannot say that what Uspensky brought in Search of the Miraculous, which is missing certain aspects of the work but is profound, or what Madame brought, which is also profound but is also it has a certain narrow view of the work. And then the next step, what does that open up to? What is the next step after? And then, of course, we had different people, but for me, primarily Michel de Salzman, who was not just their son in physical aspect, but I believe was the result, was the living result of these two mixing together. And Michel was, to me, just as incredible as Madame, in a very different way, though. And so these people gave me proof time and time again that the work was actually valid, that it produced results. And here, one of the things that I'm concerned about, and I was concerned about when I was in the foundation, is there a measure, you see? Is there a measure, an objective sort of measure of whether or not people are progressing? Because people can stay in the work for 10, 20 years and not seem to progress very much. Why is that? Well, I think part of it is because we don't have a kind of real test like they would have in the old schools. For example, if you were in Egypt, you would have these initiation rites and you have to pass them. If you were in the guilds, you would serve an apprenticeship. And the apprenticeship, if it was in the masonry guild, for example, and you were building with stone, you have to know how to dress that stone. You have to know how to place it. You have to know how it works with the other stones. And you have to build something that actually will stay up. And so you must go through an apprenticeship. And this is, of course, one of the arguments that you see on the net all the time, is people say, well, I read the book or something, or someone had told me this, and now I'm a teacher, you
Yes,
know.
the book is the initiation, many people think now.
Right, right. Even if it's Beelzebub, you know, I read Beelzebub. Well, great. I mean, maybe you can recite Beelzebub, but that doesn't mean you've gone through the, as Longfellow said, you know, uh, thanks, thanks, thy worthy man for the lesson thou hast taught. And thus, in the flaming forge of life, each lesson must be wrought. Gives you a feeling of the power of real apprenticeship, of really going through life and of really experiencing what the work is about, rather than just talking about it, you know.
So do you feel
And
there's
so
not many modern day teachers at the moment?
there aren't very many. And that's why I mentioned Keith before. I thought Keith was very interesting, Keith Bazell. I'm sorry that I only had that time to meet him that once at A&E. But I thought here was a guy that was interesting and sincere, you know, as well. And there are a few people out there like that today, and that's one of the things we're trying to gather some of these people together for this project in Spain for our attempt to create an international fourth way school in Spain.
Maybe you could tell us a little
That,
bit more about that then at the moment, what your plans are for that.
well, that is really in the works. You know, that is something connected with this writing of the second book on Secrets of the Fourth Way. I really thought that when I came to Russia almost 15 years ago, I started coming to Russia, and I live half time in Russia now and half time in my home in the Sonoran Desert. And I thought that was it. That was the biggest thing I'm going to attempt to do, because you know, it's almost too much. You know, I didn't know anybody in Russia, didn't speak the language, so on and so forth. And I heard in my head from long ago Gurdjieff saying, begin in Russia, end in Russia. And I said, is anybody doing this? I tried to find out through the foundation, is anybody completing this? Is anybody going to Russia? I mean, some people had visited Russia, and they had also translated Beelzebub into Russian. But apparently, no, there was no initiative in this. And I had been given permission by Michel de Salzman and Paul Reynard to start groups and start centers, and I started one in Oregon. And so Michel really said to me, you know, you should do this. Not Russia. He didn't specifically say Russia, but he said you should go out, find places, and do it. He said, he patted me on the back. He said, you're strong, sort of like you're healthy or something like that, and go ahead and do it. And so I did, but the foundation, of course, didn't like it, because I didn't then go to New York or wherever and say, you know, please, you know, or Paris, you know, say, please let me do this or something, because I had some past experience with some of these people, and also with one friend who was pretty high up in the work, very well-known man, and I asked him what he thought, and he said, don't go to New York. You know, he said, stay away from New York, you know. Anyway, so I thought coming to Russia and trying to have a group here and maintain a group here was like the last big thing, because now I'm 70 years old. You know, I'm not a kid. You know, time goes by. I've been in the work 50 years. And I think that, but then I don't know exactly why, but I just felt I had to do this. I had to try to restart from my point of view, and from the people that I have as friends. There's some people in different areas in the world who've been in the work a long time also, who are very interested in this. And to gather together a wisdom council, basically, of people. And that's one of the reasons why you asked me, you know, what are you going to do there? Part of why I'm hesitant to answer is because I really want more and more input from people. Not that it will be a kind of group think, you know, in the ordinary sense. We don't want that. But definitely to have input and to really listen to people as to what is important to them. And this is something that I did, matter of fact, before I left Los Angeles to go to Oregon. I asked a number of friends and things individually, what for you is the most important principle or idea or method in the work? And so I began that process there, gathering, and I'm continuing that process as I go along.
You probably got quite a few different answers for that, though, didn't you? Which is
You
good.
do. Yes. And in each one, you have to make room for inside yourself. And it's very much like the concept of the paradigm. You know, the usual idea of paradigm is that what's the next best thing to do? Yes. And it's kind of a yes and no proposition, almost like the formatory thinking, you know, I should do this, I shouldn't do that. But a paradigm really means keeping parallel thoughts together. And so somebody says, what is most important? Absolutely self-observation. Self-observation is so important. And how could you disagree with this? And somebody says, no, really, I think that's important, but self-remembering, don't forget to remember yourself. Yes? And then there's somebody over here is saying, oh, but you forgot about presence. You forgot about being present. How can you be present now? How can you observe yourself if you're not present? So these three pillars, you might say, of the work have to be in there. That's clear. But then if you come down from the 3 to, let's say, 7, right? And you expand now, what are the different kinds of artifices, you might call them, that are also important to round out this process? And so, of course, Gurdjieff has the adherents of Lagamanism from Babylon, speaking about, you know, theater and art of different sorts, and music and dance and ritual and all these things. And so I'm thinking about this, then I'm thinking about Japan. Of course, my major study wasn't through the Japanese, it was mostly through the Taoists, through the Chinese, my secondary study. But I saw in Japan something very interesting, that here they have these, what Lord Pentland spoke about as forms that lead to consciousness. And so, for example, they have ikebani, they have flower arrangement. Yes. They have arrangement of stones where the water touches the stones and makes a certain sound. And if you follow them through a Japanese garden well laid, the sounds progress you inwardly. Yes. It's a science. Yes. And the Japanese, of course, had the tea ceremony as an example, a beautiful form leading towards consciousness, but not just for every person in the work, you know, not just for initiates, but for ordinary people. They could come and participate. That's fantastic.
Because everybody gets a different version from it, don't they? That's why it's different for what we would call the ordinary people, but they're still getting something.
Exactly. And this is connected with soil preparation. Gurdjieff talks about soil, earth, preparing the earth. What are you preparing it for? You're preparing it for a seed. Yeah, you're preparing it so that something can grow. And and then you can have the fruits of this preparation. But first is soil preparation, and Gurdjieff has a number of exercises for that. One of which is the 3-finger exercise, if you remember. You know, you sense this finger, you feel this finger, and you count with the 3rd finger.
Oh, yes. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So here, sensing, feeling, counting. And what a fantastic 3-centered exercise. And when I was in the foundation, no one talked about 3-centered exercises. We did some in a kind of roundabout way, because every time that we were doing, for example, construction work or gardening or any of the other kinds of labors that we had, conscious labors, we were trying to be in our body, like hammering, be in what we're doing. We're trying to observe ourselves, so okay, and if possible, even remember ourselves, right? So we're working in this way, but for some reason there were certain ideas that weren't really discussed very much, and one of them, of course, is this idea right up here, the idea of the Enneagram. That was like taboo. Yeah, nobody talked about the Enneagram.
Do you think that's because nobody really understood it?
Oh, I think Pentland understood it quite well. I think he was concerned, and again, this may be again related to going back to what was the phase of the work. What was the soil preparation phase that was going on when I began the work 50 years ago, 40, 30 years ago? What was happening then? What did Madame Pentland and these other people think was most important to bring forth, and what to hold back? And so if you're doing, for example, as I say in my first book, the soil preparation exercise of sensing, feeling, and counting, which is a very difficult exercise. And in my book, I separate these two very often and have people just do 2 at a time, you know, sensing, feeling, counting, sensing, counting, like that, to gradually build up to these all 3 centered process. But here again, why didn't he point this back to the centers from which they came? Yes? I'm sensing this finger, but where is this sensing, source of this sensing? It's in the moving center, in the spine. Or if you like, it's in the lower abdomen. Both of those areas are connected with moving center. So what if I was to sense the finger and at the same time sense the source of it in the spine? And why didn't Gurdjieff say that?
Because he probably wanted us to work it out for ourselves, maybe?
I think that's exactly I think that's exactly it. And that what was unfolded to people like me and you and so on, you know, at that time was a partial unfoldment, because he recognized, and you can see this in Beelzebub's tales, the necessity of people working to understand and not just being given things. So here we're in this process of trying to find the next unfoldment.
He doesn't want to give it to us on a platter, does he? Because then, you know, we're not working on ourselves, are we?
That's right. Then it's useless. Then you don't build those qualities which are necessary to become man number 4 or man number 5. You don't build those qualities. All you have is more data, more information. And it's very much like the guy, you know, who's giving the talk on the instability of reason, you know, connected with the Tower of Babel. You know, he's giving this talk and he says, I think everybody would say that I understand this as well as anybody here. But I want to tell you, and he starts to cry, you know, I don't understand anything. I'm going to go rush out and plant Juneberry, you know.
Yeah, that was Hamler Ingdar, I think, wasn't it? who said all that.
Yeah.
So there's
So
little important snippets of stories in the book, for example, in Beelzebub's Tales, that give you the idea of where to go next. Like what you're saying with the fingers, you've got to think more. You have the beginning exercise, but then you've got to develop it more in yourself and find the answers.
we are the working out of the Gurdjieff work. What we do is the unfoldment. It has to happen in us. And it can never be handed, as you say, on a platter. It can never be given out that way. It has to be, even forced to work on ourselves. And part of that enforcement is that you become so curious about what Gurdjieff is saying. You go, I have to, I can't help myself. You know, I'm poisoned, as Gurdjieff once said, by the work.
Yes.
Like a poison, I have to continue. Yeah.
Because those that aren't curious are the ones that drop off anyway, because obviously they want someone just to give it to them. So they will go and find that teacher that will tell them how to think or tell them how to act.
This is exactly, I agree. I think this is exactly right, that a lot of people are so lazy and they enter the work with a kind of expectation, you know, that everything is going to be a kind of, you know, idea like row your boat gently down the stream, you know, and or they say, well, the Tao is natural, you know, you don't have to work. Well, they don't understand Taoism a damn bit. The Tao is certainly a river that goes downstream. That's nature, and you should be as much as possible in touch with your own nature. But you remember, Gurdjieff says being means two-natured. And
Yes,
the other
two-natured.
two natures, yes. And the other nature is to go upstream, and this is the real Tao. The teaching of the Tao is to go upstream back to the source inside of you. And if you can't do that, if you're just floating downstream, then you're not part of the teaching, you know. And it's true with the Gurdjieff work. You have to have demands on yourself. And those demands have to be connected with your aim. And your aim has to be connected with what is your essence need. What does my essence need to grow? Maybe I don't know that. My own feeling, and I talk about this in the second book more, is that, and maybe I'm wrong, I try to keep in question about what I'm, let's say, going towards as a belief, what I believe is true. Some things I believe is true because I verified it so often that I don't really have a doubt that it's true. You know, it's like making kasha in the morning. Kasha is the Russian term for hot cereal, oatmeal. I know how to make kasha. I don't have to, pretend I don't know how to do it. I do know how to do it, and I do it pretty much every day. So yes, that's a fact. Yeah. So certain things in my work are facts. I know. Other things I'm leaning towards. I'm thinking there's something to this, and it does seem to fit with things that Gurdjieff says. And one of them is that we have a soul. But our soul hasn't been transfigured or hasn't been completed. And if we have a soul, and if we have something that guides, and you'll see that in that Persian poem that says, if man had a soul, all wild beasts couldn't live on the earth. There wouldn't be room for wild beasts and poisonous plants and so on. And he says the soul in that poem, the soul is the leader of the will. The soul's presence is I am. Well, this leads me back to this idea that the soul does exist. If it leads the will, how can it lead the will if it doesn't exist? It exists. Okay, here's the soul. What is the soul? Well, his father says it's a slippery something, What is it? we can't really talk about the soul. I mean, that's a little beyond us. But it's something to do with a guiding force. And you know, Gurdjieff says essence comes from on high. Where does it come from? Well, let's say theoretically it comes from the level of 6 laws, the Milky Way. Because in the Milky Way, in the 6 laws, you have these 2 triads, right? One going up, one going down, which can represent being, 2 natures.
Yes.
One nature going up, one nature going down. This creates the necessary elements for an essence, which is 2-natured also. So here we are at this very high level. And why are we descending all the way down through the stars, the constellations we're born under, the planets, the sun, the planets, down into the earth, and even connecting below into the moon? Why are we doing that? I think that we have somewhere in us a kind of plan for what we need to learn here. Now that may seem strange or ridiculous, but for me, it makes sense that I came into Earth, and each one comes into a different situation. I came into this Earth, perhaps in a little more difficult situation than some people, and less difficult than other people, with 2 parents, and so on. And why did I come there? And somebody might say, well, it was just accident, like everything's an accident. But maybe I had a reason to be there, and that my soul, if you like, or something like that, had a plan for what I was to be faced with and what opportunities I was to be given. And perhaps each one of us has something like that, and we need to recognize it. Why am I here as I am, this physical type, born in New York for some reason, what is the purpose behind that? And if I haven't recognized that purpose, how can I have an aim? Because my aim then would be more just from my intellect and not from my being, not from my essence. What is the aim of my essence? What does it need to learn here on the earth? And I think that's one of the things I'm interested in. I don't know exactly yet how to pursue this in the sense of this center that we're doing. But one of the things that Gurdjieff does do is, and he says this in Herald of the Coming Good, which of course he repudiated, but it doesn't make it any less interesting. He says that he would give people a kind of clinical examination. He would have a kind of list, does this person have certain defects like laziness? Does he have digestive difficulties, where he might be given yogurt or something, and he looks at in a sense, but in this way, somewhat psychologically, but certainly physically too, and in relation to addiction, he looks at the person and tries to see what they need.
So if they sort out how they are in their body and their mind, then hopefully their soul will help develop as well on the right path.
I think that's part of it. Yes, that he was very interested in subjective work and not just the objective. And of course, the objective work is what everybody needs. We all need to observe. We all need to remember. We all need to be present. All those things are just, the most basic elements of the what we're going to make for our dinner, you might say. The centers of gravity of what we need to feed. But then there's a whole much more artistic aspect There's this sort of scientific, and then the artistic aspect is that how do I know, does this person need more work with, say, art?
Mm-hmm.
This person maybe is in their head, very intellectual, can deal with ideas better than any of us, but he doesn't have a feeling for life. He needs art. He needs something, music. He needs a wife that is the other kind. Whatever it is that they need to fill these gaps inside, these deficits inside. And this really demands the artistic side of the teacher. The teacher has to have this side too. Yes, it's very good to be very much like Ouspensky in a sense, and really have the ideas and know them and be able to talk about the laws and all this. And that's important. But then you have to have a Mrs. Ouspensky, you know, and she sort of gets to the nitty gritty of what are you doing? What is important for you? What do you want? Mm. And so I think that's part of the mix that I want in Spain. I want this mix that allows for us to explore deeply the objective side of the work and the subjective, or what sometimes people call the subconscious side of the work.
Because it's supposed to be trying to balance ourselves out, as Gurdjieff called his institute, the harmonious development, isn't it? We're trying to harmoniously develop all our centers and all our, so we're using our intellect, our emotions, and our bodily movements and the instincts should all be balanced, which is why I think is how you develop your soul.
And this is very interesting, isn't it? Because if three are together, like the three centers, there I am. That's what Jesus says. If two or three are gathered in my name, that is in the consciousness, there I am. And what does he say in the Persian poem? Soul's presence is I am. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So this is perhaps the central theme of what I want to do in Spain. I want to gather together, as we talked about with the Osiris and Isis, to bring together the parts which are in a sense still fragmented. They're not all integrated. And I want to create a synergy in the practices and in the understanding of people, which pulls together all these different aspects of my work and helps me to understand how they're linked together. You know, that three-centeredness and I am are not separate ideas. Yes, but they're put that way. But they're put that way because we need to separate them first, just as Osiris had to be separated. That was a necessity. If Osiris had been separated, there would be no Isis putting him together. There would be no then potency. They brought the 70 pieces plus the one was Osiris's penis, you know.
Yeah, and
had to find that. That was the most difficult part to find. But then that's connected with, of course, C12. Yeah. But here you have this same idea that Gurdjieff gives. He says, don't start with C12, start with Soul 12. Mm-hmm. Collect yourself, remember yourself. Then you bring in C12, and the conditions are right. This is Isis. Isis is the womb. You plant the seed, and in time, you produce a higher body, which is Horus, higher consciousness. And we need, I think, to take that process, keep taking it a step further, so that in time we produce Horus as a work. A new being, you might say. It may be somebody's child in the work, who knows, but it will be a step-by-step process which we can't stop. We can't stop now. We can't just say we're finished. Gurdjieff gave it all, we're finished. Madame gave it all, we're finished. Michelle, we're finished. We're not finished at all.
Oh, it's a continuing progress.
Yeah, it's as someone said, it's up to us. Yes, it is up to us. If we're going to go through the whole Enneagram, it's up to us to see where we are, what level we're at, because certainly now it looks like we're at Harnal at Nyatsa, we're at Harnal at Ayut rather. We're at the point of disharmony where the Mi-Fa interval and the Si-Do interval have mixed, and it's like having a person with one leg longer and one shorter. They don't walk right. Yeah,
It's off kilter.
that's right. And God apparently intentionally brought this in, because if it wasn't off kilter, there'd be no change, there'd be no mutation, there'd be no possibility of growing higher reason, so that you wouldn't get a Beelzebub who grows these horns representing the highest level, you know, of being achievement. Yeah.
And when we was talking about, I was talking about the Harnal just now, this is all part of the octave, isn't it? The Gurdjieff discusses of how everything goes along in an octave from do to
Right.
do, re, mi, upwards. And there's two intervals or hiatuses. And one of the ones you've just spoken about is the one that's from the, if I remember rightly, the exterior, the outside force comes in.
Yeah. Actually, the soul law interval is where there's a division into outer and inner. I think that's what we're finding today. There's an outer part of the work which is focused on, to some extent, on what has been given. And there's inner part of the work which is still seeking, still searching, still part of that group of his, the seekers of truth. I don't think that group ever stopped. I think it is continuing today. And you need to have both of these groups. You can't just say, well, the maintenance group, you know, is a bad group. It's not a bad group. It's necessary. The creative, more evolving group is also necessary. And these two should be like this. And the line underneath them, which should connect them, should create a triad that pulls everything together. That's why I have no wish, for example, that the foundation doesn't exist or doesn't progress. I certainly hope it does. And there are people in the foundation that are very credible still. But I'm hoping that they will support rather than what they've done in the past, which is actually try to get rid of people who were going out from them and trying to make something new. Certainly, I don't want them to be in support of people who are not trying to be authentic, not trying to be sincere, but people who are, I think they should support. That's my feeling. And if I was still in the foundation, I would try to do that. But instead, there's actually some active attempt to destroy what people are doing who are not part of the foundation. And I think that's not right. I don't
No,
agree
it's
with
not. That's more of an insecurity, isn't it, in them, that they think that they're going to lose whatever it is they think they're going to lose. They're not in control of all the Gurdjieff work going out there then. And you know, I don't think he would like that. I think he would prefer that people were finding it, other people were working on it. I don't think he wanted an organization to run everything, did he? Unless, you know, back in his day he had his harmonious centre, they would all come to him. He was on his own then. Where today I think he always wanted his books to be read, not necessarily in churches, but to be spread, didn't he? The word, his
Yes.
books and writings to be spread out.
And this is certainly the idea of becoming fishers of men. Because you have to spread your net wide. It doesn't mean you're going to take everything that comes in your net or everything's going to stay there, but you have to spread it wide enough. And that's the good aspect of the internet. It can allow one to spread things wider than when I was looking, the only thing I could do was look at the telephone book, which of course had nothing in it about the Gurdjieff Foundation, zero. Talk to people individually, look at newspapers and things like that. Look at the books, and none of them had any way to contact anybody, you know, it's just miraculous. And just hope that what this thing, and as I say, I think it's still a mystery, called magnetic center is, would somehow miraculously bring me to a real teacher in the Gurdjieff work.
Yes.
You know, but now you still have to have that same miraculous. You have to search for the miraculous. You can't just look up on Fourth Way LA or something like this and expect you're going to get what you need. It's not there. So you keep looking. You're not satisfied. You're never satisfied until you find an authentic teacher. And that's not easy. It's not easy today. It's not easy then.
But if people were interested in your school or wanted to offer themselves or become pupils, is there a way to get in touch with you about it, discuss it more if someone was intrigued?
Yes, certainly. My sort of project manager is a guy named Jussi Korkala, Jussi, and he lives in Finland right now, in Helsinki, where I'm going in a few days. But he's moving right away to Spain. He's going to be the point man. And you can get in touch with him. He's on Facebook. Also, we have a website. Well, you can get in touch with me through Facebook as well, Alan Francis, which is not too hard to find because I have this group in Moscow and you know, and so on.
I'm sure there's not too many Alan Francises in Moscow.
No, probably not. And it says Gurdjieff on it somewhere, you know, and Tai Chi and things. And so it's possible to get in touch with me there. We also have a site called, and this is kind of, you know, over the top a little bit, but it's called Question and Answer Q&A with Master of the Fourth Way. And that's my site. And somebody said, well, you think you're a master? And I said, well, probably not in the sense you were thinking. But after 50 years, I better have mastered something, or I better give up.
I do look at that website myself, the Q&A thing, and I find it very informative. And there's some good dialogue going on in there as well.
Yeah, I'm very happy with it. And we really try to keep it disciplined. And sometimes people might think, well, that's too much, too austere, too disciplined. And I think that it's an experiment. It's an experiment. But I look at the other sites and I see that they lack focus and they lack a kind of a measure of things. And so that's what I'm trying to bring to this particular site. And so I try to keep it very clear. I have simple rules, but I usually enforce them. I try not to be rigid. Try to, like in Tai Chi, you know, you try to have a ridge pole, they say, you know, as Madame talks about, you know, this correct positioning in your spine, you might say, but that's not to mean that you can't be flexible. Mm-hmm. You know? So how to combine these two is a kind of difficulty, but we're trying to manage that in the site. As I say, it's an experiment, and I really think, to a large extent, everything we do in the work begins as an experiment. It begins as a question, you know. And if someone would say, well, are you sure about what you're doing? Yeah, I'm sure about what I'm doing, but I also have myself and what I'm doing in question at the same time. And I think you can be confident about what you're doing without being overly confident you know, without losing a sense of perspective about yourself and about what you're trying. And this task of creating the center in Spain is such a big task, and I need help. I mean, you know, when I started in Russia, although I was told don't go to New York, I knew somebody in the IAGF, you know, International Gurdjieff Foundation Association, and I said to him, I would like your advice. I would like to be able to consult you. You've been in the work longer than I have, and you know, I respect that people who've been in the work, and there were 3 people in the IAGF. I don't know if you know Alexander de Salzman and Peter Brook and Thilo Obrecht, and these 3, and so I tried to be in consultation with them. I gave them little reports about what we're doing, asked them what they thought, and I got some feedback from Thilo, and then all I got was what I can say was a kind of Machiavellian approach from these people, and so I cut off communication with them, and I was frankly a little surprised, and but then I read Machiavelli. You know, I've studied Sun Tzu, you know, the art of war and strategy, and I've lived fairly long in sometimes difficult conditions, and so it wasn't that much of a surprise. It was more of a kind of feeling of being let down, you might say, rather than a surprise, you know, that they wouldn't see this as an opportunity, as a challenge.
I think Gurdjieff would have encouraged you, myself, because he would want to see the work taken in different directions. As long as you are being true to what he's teaching, it should be fine.
Yeah, I think so. And, you know, he brought in such interesting people, like the original Alexander de Salzman, you know, that was Madame's first husband.
Mm-hmm.
He was such, you know, an incredible character. Supposedly, Rene Damal used him as the central character in his book.
Oh, I did not know that.
And, he was such an unusual character. And then you had people like Bennett, who was brilliant for sure, but also he was sort of seemed easily swayed, suggestible,
Mm-hmm.
because he went after different kinds of gurus and fell under their spell. It seemed like, and yet at the same time, he was really something. He really brought up some very good things and wrote some great books, and had a good idea in his development of his work, and then there was all kinds of different people who Gurdjieff took in. Yeah? He took in, and even some of these people who might not be the best prospects, and yet some of them, of course, I think turned out very well. And he took chances. He grabbed Lord Pentland when he came, more or less, who had been with Uspensky 10 years. And he took him, and within a year, according to Pentland, he more or less was transformed in this short time before his death. And he put him at the head with Madame of America. And you can think of all the people who didn't like that. He was somebody coming with Uspensky, and Uspensky, of course, was not revered by a lot of the Gurdjieffians, right? And here was a guy who was young, relatively. I think he was 40. He had been with Gurdjieff a short time, and here he's put at the head of all of America. What an extraordinary idea. But he knew
I suppose it's not because how long you've been with someone, it's whether you get the ideas and whether you understand them, that Gurdjieff's going to be looking for them kind of people, isn't he? Not because
That's
someone's
right.
been with him for 17 years and someone's only been with him for free. It's about whether you know what he's talking about and can transmit it on to the next group of people.
That's right. Yes, I think that's right. And so what we're doing in Spain is really beginning. One of the ideas, of course, as I said, is to create a syncretic work, to bring together the pieces of the work and to show, not just by explanation, somewhat by explanation, but certainly by how to work, that you find within yourself how these different elements come together. And therefore, what Gurdjieff said about Beelzebub, he said originally when he wrote some pamphlets, yeah? And he thought, that's not going to work. So I have to blow up these ideas, right? And he did into Beelzebub and Meetings with Remarkable Men and Life is Real. He blew up these things so that people would have to work. Yeah, they couldn't just take it in formatory apparatus. How can you take in Beelzebub through formatory apparatus? It's basically impossible. Really, you can't take in Meetings with Remarkable Men or the third book either that way. You just can't do it. If you do, of course, you're not reading it. You're not getting any of the gist out of it. You're just reading the outer sort of form of it.
Yes, like
so now he's forcing you, right, to bring together and then gradually to say, how does this law of three connect with the three centers? How does this connect with I am? And so on and so forth. And how can I now, when I make an effort, bring these together so that I have a very potent new way of doing my work? I think it's possible. I think it's possible. I really do. I think that we can produce something that will accelerate, because she says, I'm looking for those accelerated results. Yes, accelerated results. Well, I think we need them. And we need them now more than ever, because people can't wait 20, 30, 40 years to grow a higher being body.
No. As Gurdjieff says, we need to try and do it in this lifetime.
That's what Milarepa says. Tibetan. Yes, absolutely. So in my book, this one,
which is available on Amazon, I noticed, and other good bookshops, I'm sure.
Yeah, I have a very big chapter on developing higher bodies and how to go about that. And that has been throughout my life one of my major interests, and I talked to Michelle about that as well. I led a secret group in the foundation for a period of time in Los Angeles on the study of higher being bodies. That was many years ago. It was outside of the workhouse. It was at somebody's private house, but it was supported by Norma Flynn, who was my group leader, and also Paul and Michelle. And so I'd been studying this both in the Gurdjieff tradition and in the Taoist tradition for now 50 years. And I saw in the Taoist tradition almost an exact parallel with the food diagram of Gurdjieff. Qi is food, and it goes up to Jingqi, which is C12, sex energy. And these parallel and then are the beginnings of the transformation of C12 into the higher body, or what they call the immortal embryo. And what I found was Gurdjieff hid this dog deeper than perhaps any of the others, because he doesn't talk directly about Taoism, which is amazing. Yes. But the Taoism is the inner alchemy that he's talking about. And what he does talk about is the two Chinese brothers who weren't Chinese, they were Akkadian descendants who went down from Mongolia when the Sands came with their people into China down the Yellow River, and together that created the basis of a new science, which they rediscovered the law of seven and on and on and on. And yet he doesn't speak about Taoism. But he does speak about that there are pathways, but very little bit. This is one of these, again, they hide. They talk about that there's a pathway, right? Starting from the top of the head. Madame specifically emphasizes this, which is in the second phase, right? Talks about the axis of attention, which Michelle also speaks about a lot. And this is the central line, not only in Taoism, but of course in India as well. You see the Ida and Pingala, both. But then he doesn't speak about how that energy system spreads out, just like the vascular system, the blood system in the body, throughout the whole body. And that, as Pentland said, when you get this energy, you have to make sure it spreads out evenly through the whole body. How does it spread? You see, they don't say, but it has to spread through these pathways. And I speak about that quite a bit in the first book. So there are many things that Gurdjieff hid. I mean, he speaks openly about Sufism and the dervishes. He speaks openly about Egypt and India, and about his time in studying Orthodox Christianity, et cetera, et cetera. All these things he speaks about openly. He gives out openly the Gurdjieff movements, the gymnastics. We have, you probably know, we have the art process in Gurdjieff work, design and color.
Mm-hmm.
You've heard of that? Yeah. And so we have a lot of these things, and these are put out. You can see them, you can be in touch with them and just be relatively new in the work, all these things. But about these energy pathways, about the inner alchemy, which, by the way, was his main interest. Because what did he say about what his interest was? His main interest was Hamblood's
Which is
blood
transformation.
That's what his central and his gift was. He said he had perhaps greater Hamblood's than anyone in any epoch. Anyone. Why would he say such a thing? That's quite amazing. And so he had the power of this astral power, but that astral power develops through these pathways and through the specific alchemy, where you bring C12, Soul 12, Me 12 down to the lower abdomen, and that's in the food diagram. Why do you bring these three down to the lower abdomen? Because they're the seeds for higher bodies, and that's the place of seeding. And that's the same as in Taoism, exactly. You bring these energies down. I'd have to explain that. It's in the book, but that's a little more complex. And in Taoism, also this point here, where the third eye is, mm-hmm. where now science is saying, the pineal gland is not a vestigial organ. It's not something that has no function, which is what the science was saying 30, 40 years ago. But it really does have an important role to play. What role does it have to play?
It works on our imagination and things, and
it's very connected with higher centers, isn't it? Mm-hmm. Yes, what Gurdjieff talked about.
So in ways, Gurdjieff was the alchemist of the modern century. His work really is a chemical wedding of bringing everything together, of transmuting yourself.
That's right. And that's the hidden part that nobody hardly talks about. Now, Pentland, he used to say sometimes something very interesting. He used to say, nobody practices the food diagram. What does that mean? I thought, as soon as he said it, what do you practice the food diagram? Here's a diagram. How do you practice the food diagram? Yes. But the food diagram is exactly the alchemy. It's exactly the alchemy. It deals with C12, the possible creation from air, right? Soul 12, 192, 96, 48, 24, 12. And from impressions, the do, passive do, remember they're passive do's, each one's a passive do, do, re, mi, 48, 24, 12. Now here I am with this line of 12s, and this line has to be brought down to the earth. That's the soil preparation through presence. You have to bring it down and through sensation and plant it. See there. From there, you have to have a fire. Alchemy, always you've got to have a fire.
Yeah.
You have to have heat. You have to sublimate this. And so you see in the food diagram, you see something, again, that's not brought out. He castigates people for the yogic breathing, the breathing that is forceful, or that can imbalance your whole system. But there's very little about conscious breathing. Why is that? If air must move from 192, 96, 48, we know that happens automatically. And then it enters the lungs. Separately, it goes into the nose, into the brain, which is a separate process. But into the lungs at this level, where it then combines with blood. And now it's moving into a cellular level. It's moving into the microcosmos. Yeah. So it's very interesting. Can I follow by deepening my sensation? Yeah, with my attention, can I deepen my sensation to follow this process? In doing so, I can, not only is the impressions coming in at mi fa, and the impression, remember, is hydrogen 48 too. So here's hydrogen 48 and hydrogen 48 of the air octave combining, and with blood. And now you have this point, mi fa, and you get to soul. But do you automatically go to law? Does 24 go to 12 automatically? No, not necessarily. I think you can find in your own observation, and this is incorrect, in, I think, what Ouspensky says. He's sensing once you get to do, re, mi, you have a shock, and then you go fa, you automatically go to soul. That's the idea presented. But I find that's not true, because if you automatically went to soul, you would be in a much higher state of awareness than you are. We may get a certain energy, like you get in fa 24, a certain kind of feeling, but you don't get a change of impressions. Yes? You don't get the kind of change that moves from form into substance, where you see through the form, where you begin to perceive on a deeper level of impression. And so if I can breathe consciously, yes, if I can follow this process, I can begin to extract, as is said by certain people like Michelle, something from the air, some finer quality, whether it's kind of like silver or gold, some kind of particles that are finer, I can begin to extract. And by doing that, I strengthen this soul 12, and I begin to increase the soul 12 in me. I have C12 now. Naturally, there's C12 unless you're ill. Now I'm strengthening the soul 12, and at the same time, I'm working with the impression octave to bring about mi 12. So here's one of the secrets, I think, and I wrote it in my book, about the impression of air. Assimilating the deeper impression of air. And of course, at this point where you get to soul, is it possible to continue? Can I move to law 6? Is it possible? Maybe. maybe sometimes, maybe occasionally, I can get to this next higher level. And so you see, practicing the food diagram, right, is taking the food inwardly.
Yeah, I've never thought of it. The way you describe it is fantastic, because I often have problems myself about the whole tables and the diagrams. I used to get them very confused, but the way you've explained it is a lot better than how I've been told about it before. So thank you for that, Alan. That was great. Because I think many people get stuck on that far, don't they? And they just stay on it and don't go to the next bit. It's my own experience.
I think this is true, and you have to work the Enneagram, and you have to also see that these processes are understandable. They're not so confusing as they first look. And it's like the analogy of taking flour and water. I take flour and water. I have no idea the octave before that. How did people come up with making flour from grains of wheat or something? I mean, it's a fantastic story, I'm sure. But somehow you get that you have flour and you have water, but you don't know the right combination, how much water and how much flour. If it's the wrong amount, you get nothing. It just, if you get too much water, it just, dissolves. So I need knowledge, and this comes in at the Mi-Fa interval. New knowledge is, how do I mix the body sensation with feeling? How do I bring these two together? You remember this? Mm-hmm. How do I bring these two together so that I get dough? This is something new. It's just a lump. You can't eat it. Well, maybe you could eat it, but it's not very good. But it's this transitional phase in development. Now I've got this lump, and I guess it's a little bit like man number 4 or something. Yeah, because it can't. It's not stable. You leave it there for a while, and it disintegrates, and that's why you put it under a towel, a wet towel usually. Yeah, and what do you do with it? You put leaven in it. Yeah, yeast. And the Bible talks about measures of leaven that you hide in the dough. Yeah, this is very interesting. Yeah. Yeah. What am I hiding in the dough? The dough now is the form of the body. What am I hiding in this dough that's so important? And that will grow in the next interval. Do, re, mi, fa, sol. Now it's ready. What's it ready for? It's expanded. It's like Pentland says, throughout your whole body, this energy has to spread evenly. He says, what if you forget an ear? Then maybe your astral body is born without an ear. You have to, this is very comprehensive sort of thing, very subtle and very deep. So now I'm at that point where perhaps I've expanded this energy through my whole body. And of course, the exercise of keeping an energy field just outside the body. You bring your sensation so that it's a little bit outside, not too much because we're not that strong, but a little bit. And so this is like this idea. And then you have to apply fire, which is many different ways of looking at it. There's an energetic fire, like the Tibetans and yogis do the tumo, it's called, where they create an inner fire and they can sit outside in the cold and the snow and melt snow. I don't think you need to do that. You don't need that much fire, but but you need fire energetically. There's a fire element, and then there's also intentional suffering. I'm going to give up something in myself, something to do with my ego, something to do with my vanity, and I'm going to give that up because I want something. I want to let my soul continue to evolve. I don't want to just die like a dog. And that's not saying anything against dogs. I like dogs. And so, but a human shouldn't die like a dog. That's what. So now I begin to create an inner fire. And I have this fire contained. This is part of the alchemy, contained so that it sublimates this hydrogen 12 and begins to let it rise in a more subtle form, and therefore as a higher hydrogen even perhaps, but in a subtle form. And this begins to permeate my whole body. And Gurdjieff says if it permeates enough, and if you have enough concentration, then it's like having this cup with water in it, and you pour salt in it, you pour salt in it, and you pour salt in it. Eventually that salt comes out of solution and begins to crystallize. And then you have the crystallization, which is law, the seventh step after the soul law interval. You have the crystallization of a higher body. You begin to have an astral level to your being. And finally, of course, you have to go to the next step, which is kind of the step which is related to perfecting. A little bit like he talks about perhaps in Beelzebub, where the higher being souls, come up and they're in purgatory. Well, there's a kind of special situation at the Cedo interval, which again is another thing that has been left out of the Enneagram. It's in the law of octaves, right? Clearly, Mi, Fa, Si, Do, and that brings you to Sol La. But it's left out of the law of octaves. You just see Si, Do in the Enneagram, but you don't see that it needs something too. So here you are. You have invested all this time and energy, yes, into developing something, and now what? Yeah, now what? Did you see Master of the Carriage?
I know of the horse and carriage analogy.
But the cartoon, it's sort of like a cartoon.
Oh no.
It's on the net. You should see it, Master of the Carriage, because it was guided by Michel de Salzman.
Oh. Okay.
And he showed it in New York. I was there when they previewed it in New York. And it's quite extraordinary. I don't want to tell you now the end, because I want you to see it.
I should look it up, yeah.
Try to connect near the end where there's a fight, and try to connect that with this idea of what it might mean, this Cedo interval.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because I wanted to just say, because I was always warned about trying to perfect your higher being body, that it can crystallize in the wrong way, which is why we have to do all this work on ourselves and make sure we are balanced, because if we're not, it will I'm trying to remember the words that the man said, but it was like it would be not an abomination, but it wouldn't be how we want it to be.
Well, really, Gurdjieff says that you might find the room empty.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
There'd be nobody there really, or you might end up like, which is very unusual, like a doppelganger. You know what a doppelganger is?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Supposedly Hitler was a doppelganger.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I'm having a revelation now. Now I suddenly understand something.
That would be like an eternal Hasnamus.
Yes.
In our language. And so, yes, of course, one doesn't want to be an eternal thing.
No.
That would be horrendous, and that's scary. But on the other hand, when am I going to complete this process? This is one of the problems with the whole concept of I don't work for results. Because of course you're going to work for results. If you don't work for results, you won't get a result.
Yes.
Period. You just won't get it. And this is what I was talking about before, about lack of measure. I'm not working for results. Well, why are you working?
I think that's some kind of new age misunderstanding about how the path's more important than where you get to. But where we get to is important in the Gurdjieff work, because there's an aim to go for.
And he makes that very clear. You must have an aim, one, and those aims include an indestructible I, higher body, perhaps connecting with conscience, having a will, all these things are basic aims, and they are also results. And what happens is that people say, well, and this is really formatory thinking, I think, on their part. They say, well, if you visualize the result, if you think I know what the result is supposed to be, then you'll never get there because you'll always be blocking what's new. That is what has to come through in order to produce this result. But that's stupid, isn't it? Isn't that? Because the fact is that if I know that, I'm going to guard against that. I'm not going to say I know exactly what an astral body is or an indestructible I is. I don't know exactly, but I know I want to go there. And this is the same when I saw Pentland or Michelle or somebody, and I said, I'm not going to be them, but I want to go in that same direction, you know, and I want those results that they got, you know, for me, for my individuality. And again, as yet, I don't know what that's going to be, but I know that's my aim. And if I don't have an aim, well, as you know, Nicole talks about the idea of sin. You know, sin is missing the mark. So if I have this attitude, well, I don't want to go to the mark. I don't want to go, you know, I'm always going to miss it. I'm always going to be sinning. And I think so this becomes a kind of sin of the work is to repeat like a mantra. We don't work for results. We don't work for results. You know, it's wrong. It's wrong. We have to understand better than that. And not create these mechanical mantras that people like to repeat. One of the reasons also that I left the work is because people like these kinds of mantras, and they like to stay. I had a guy who was a leader of the work in one state I knew, who I went to their meetings for a while, and every time somebody would ask a question, I was sitting in this group, by the way, this new group. Imagine I've been in the work longer than this guy, over 40 years at the time, and he put me in a new group. And I just went there to see what they were doing, you know, to try to understand, you know, what the approach was, because I'm interested. And every time somebody asked a question, he would tell them, well, what about sensation? What was your sensation? No matter what the question was, it was always, you know. And I thought, why don't you listen to their question?
You just had a go-to answer.
And that's formatory.
Yeah.
That's wrong. That's formatory. That's just wrong. And he kept doing that. And I asked him, I said, well, why don't you listen to what they're saying and try to reply to their own question? And he says, well, the experiment here is about sensation. And I said, well, it's a great experiment. You know, that's a great experiment. But really, we're here to exchange with people. You know, we're having a real dialogue with people, not to tell people what to do, but to listen, and then through that create a living process between you and the person, and what they're trying something. That's what's valuable. You know, if they're trying, how could you not respond to them? But it didn't make any difference.
Well, I wouldn't want to be with a teacher or a leader that didn't listen to me. You know, if I was being the student, and I would like to think that if I was teaching somebody, I would listen to them and be their ears and their eyes to try and help them understand what they're asking, not just give them a formatory answer.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's so fundamental to Mr. Gurdjieff's work that he's working with people and not trying to put something on top of people, like a new personality of what you should do. And it's really the meaning of education, of course. You know, people take education as adding on to you, but education means to draw out, to draw action of drawing from the out of the person. And what he was doing was putting, you know, kind of hand over them. Don't tell me what you really want to say. Tell me what I want to hear.
Mm.
And that kind of attitude, I don't say that's throughout the foundation. Certainly it isn't. And there are many good people in the foundation even now. But unfortunately, there's that tendency, you know. And I want to find a way in which to reduce. We're always going to have these mechanical things going on in our work, but how to reduce them as much as possible, uh, and actually to have some kind of organic work, you might call it, like Frank Lloyd Wright called his architecture organic architecture. And I think that's what we need more, and to find a way where we really begin to understand what phase of the work we're in now. What does the work need now? And it's certainly not the same as years ago. We want to pull in everything that we can find that's useful. So as Gurdjieff approached it in the beginning, he approached it in a kind of authoritarian way in some ways, patriarchal way. He was tough a lot of times with people. He gave them shocks. And later, as he grew older, he seemed to give different kinds of shocks. They might have been still just as strong, but they were less violent. And so I think there was a learning process going on there as well. And then you had Madame, and she brought something incredible, and Michel, and he did. And I think we can somehow find a way, not that we're at that level, but we can find a way to include those influences and those teachings. And of course, Madame's book is quite extraordinary, you know, from her notebooks. Hopefully they'll put out more and they won't just hold everything, you know, forever. You know.
Need to share.
I think it's necessary now. We're in a critical period of life on Earth, I think, actually. I don't think we know what's going to happen. I know there are people who adamantly think that the Earth is warming and that there's a global warming problem. That is certainly possible, but also it is very possible we're going to go into a global cooling period. We're at a minimum sunspot minimum right now. We're entering into it right at this time. We've had some of the coldest weather in America, for example, and other areas that we've had for a very long time, deepest snows. We may go to what's called a Maunder minimum, which was 300 years ago, where we had a mini ice age that froze the Thames River. There is speculation that we could go into that also. But the point is that I don't know. I'm not a meteorologist. I try to follow these things and try to listen to the arguments carefully and avoid the hysteria. It's one of the reasons, and there are multiple reasons why I'm thinking of that Spain is going to be one of the best possible places to be. It is a very mild climate. For me, at least, I live in the Sonoran Desert, which gets to 110 or 15 sometimes. So if it gets up to 90 in Spain, I'm not gonna
Blame.
And staying in Moscow here, where it can get down to bitter cold weather, it's not going to get bitter cold either. It's near the sea, so it has that balance of the land and sea, which is very important. It has very good water. One of the reasons I'm concerned about where I live now in Sonoran Desert is because the water may fail. We have aquifers, but if they start draining water into the cities more, then the aquifers could fail, and then my property house wouldn't be worth anything. So I'm intending to sell my house as part of this process of buying land and everything in Spain. And
So it'll be a permanent site in Spain then?
Correct. Yeah, as permanent as can be. Yeah, and other people will join. Usi is the first one down there, the point man, and we'll be looking for possibly abandoned village. There are abandoned villages in Spain which are reasonable to buy, as well as sort of haciendas and places like that where we might be able to buy something. We want a place where we can have sort of all the compartments of that we want. I would like to see theater in there. My parents were actors, so I have a little bit of that in my blood. But I think theater is a tremendous way of getting across ideas. I think it's just fabulous. We want to have Gurdjieff gymnastics, which we have here in Russia. And I feel like the gymnastics are important soil preparation before people get into the movements. I think people get into the movements unprepared. And I think the gymnastics are good preparation for that. And I think that, unfortunately, the movements tend to lead some people into becoming prima donnas. And to me, it's the worst thing that can happen. Certainly in the Osho and these kind of people, these groups, you see it, where vanity and pride are so evident. But you also see it in the foundation as well, that this prima donna situation occurs, which is, I think, the death of the movements if it happens too much. So the gymnastics, the art, I want somebody, I'm not an artist, so I want somebody who's an artist, who will lead the design and color, which I think is also incredible. A real help to going into subconscious work. Real help. If you do it the way it's designed to do, it brings you inward in a new way. It forces, sort of, you could say, forces you to let go of your old constructs. In order to do it, you have to drop the constructs. You have to drop what I should do, what I shouldn't do. Is this person going to think I'm stupid if I make something that looks different or whatever? You have to drop all of it to do design and color. And I think that's just great. And so we want all these elements. I want organic food. I'm a meat eater, so I'm not saying don't eat meat. I think meat for a lot of people is important. People who are vegetarians, of course, could have their own meals and so on. But I think it's very important to reduce this pesticides and all these poisons and all the hormones and crap that is being put into our bodies, because I think it causes these dysfunctions that Gurdjieff was so concerned about. He says that real productive work cannot be done if you have these dysfunctions he was describing. You have to somehow get your centers and your functioning up to a certain point to have productive work or to create a higher body. How can I create a higher body if the food diagram is cut off at some point, if I'm not digesting my food, for example, properly, or the air properly? So these are all things that I'm very, very excited about, really, that this might be possible. And as we did in Los Angeles, do a lot of construction work with the body, real work. It's men's work, you might say, but women can also do it. It's possible, yes, if they want to, if they like, why not? Yes. And gardening and farming, all these things which are labor, conscious labor, as it says in the Bible, he earned by the sweat of his brow, Adam, right? Conscious labor. You have to sweat. You have to be willing to put out a big effort, not just sort of push a pen around or something like that, or talk on the net. You have to be willing. And we did that in Los Angeles. One of the best parts of being in Los Angeles was that we really did work physically. And on the other hand, here we had the garden with the flowers. And one of my favorite tasks was gathering flowers for the lunch and dinner. A lot of times women would do it, but I would always volunteer because it was such a pleasure to have these beautiful vibrations of these flowers and to try to make them into some kind of almost a picture that emanated, from the life of these flowers. you know, something. And my feeling was that if you did it well, you help create those conditions in which an exchange between people was more possible.
Mm.
Something simple as that, something so simple, and yet that it would add some important condition. And so I always liked to do that. And of course, people might say, "Well, that's a woman's job." I don't believe in any of that nonsense. You know, I really don't. We worked hard as men, but if you don't combine the feminine with the masculine in yourself, and this is very old teaching, and this is certainly connected with Osiris and Isis and Nephites. If you don't combine these elements in yourself, how can you be complete? You
Yeah.
can't.
To be a whole, we need the male and the female energies in us
Absolutely.
and balance.
Yeah. And they both give different qualities, different vibrations, and they must mix together. As we talked about, flour and water have to mix together. In this case, flour is the lower part, like Osiris. Osiris, you know, it's so strange, you know, he was like stupid, you know, he let himself be murdered, you know, and you think, wow, how that's like the ordinary mind, you know.
Yes, he
And
was
here
tricked,
comes,
wasn't he?
he was tricked, that's right.
Mm.
He wasn't cunning. Gurdjieff says you've got to be cunning, you know,
Yeah.
cunning, like it says, I think in the Gnostics, you know, you need to be cunning like the snake, you know, docile like the lamb, but cunning like the snake.
Yeah.
Yeah. Have these qualities combined.
Well, your ideas for Spain sound fantastic, and I'd love to be a part of it. And I hope people will get in touch with you to try and get this motivated and going. I'm actually going to call it to a close now, if you don't mind.
Okay.
And I hope we can do this again. I have other ideas to talk to you about now from what we've discussed today. So hopefully we
I
can
would
talk
like that.
again.
Thank you so much. You were very, very kind to bring me up and to listen to my long, long talk.
Oh, no, thank you, Anne. And I've learned a lot myself, so I've really appreciated it, and many other people will have too. So I shall draw this to a close. Thank you. I shall
Okay.
press stop.
I'll say das vidanya.
Das for Bonya.
Das vidanya. Bye bye.